Welcome to the Gamification Report, episode 17. This week we're going to be looking at the gamification of sports and fitness, what's called Exergamification, and we're going to look also at the gamification of depression treatment for LGBT youth. It's Pride Week here in Toronto, just finished, and so we want to look at some of the ways we can use gamification to get at helping folks that feel excluded, and that would include depression, of course, and certain non-traditional groups that might feel excluded because of social pressures or norms. And the suicide rate in LGBT youth is still much higher than it is in the regular adolescent population. So we want to look at gamified elements that we might use to be of use here. So let's get started by looking at Exergamification. This is Matt Deloy's work as of 2017, and there's a lot of ways to look at integrating exercise and fitness into gamification. There are what's called novelty effects, which is the Pokemon Go story. So for example, when Pokemon Go came out 2 years ago, everyone was running around with their smartphones trying to find Pokemon Go creatures. It had a high novelty effect, and so that got a lot of people interested. And when they measured the number of walking, people were walking about another half a mile to a mile a day when they were playing Pokemon Go. Unfortunately, the New England Journal of Medicine later reported that they stopped doing it when they stopped playing Pokemon. But novelty effects produced a change in behavior that was connected to the game itself. So motivation engagement strategies are very, very key in Exergamification. And I got to tell you, if you go onto the App Store, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of games about fitness. But the problem, and what we're going to see as we explore it, is that motivation engagement strategies are relatively low in these builds, and so they're competing with other apps, but people are not going to stay with these apps much more than a few weeks in many cases, and in many cases really aren't going to see the benefits of the app. So let's try to understand a little deeper how we can increase engagement. A lot of social interaction and levels and virtual rewards are going to lead to motivation in these games. It can be social pressure as well. Self-esteem, achievement, and self-competition are part of the psychological profile, and self-monitoring, decreasing sitting, and engagement, for example, are behavior elements. So we have all these motivation and psychological and behavior elements we want to build into Exergamification. Now, there are many different methods to use. This is a review article that they produced, and we can see these various games. You can do martial arts or game activities at home with using a VR set, and of course you can have various goals so that when you're able to complete certain moves, you can get different scores. And this looks great, and it's a lot of fun to play them. The problem is getting people to play it for more than a few weeks. This is the difficulty in Exergamification. So when we talk about gamification, in this case, we would use Jane McGonigal's definition that a game in this case should have a goal, it should have rules, it should provide some feedback to the player to let them know how they're doing, and that you have to voluntarily accept 1 to 3 so that you're going to buy into the game and accept the general build of the game here. Now, what the findings were in his research was that almost no games had any form of badges, and we've talked in previous broadcasts about how important badges are, how they really change behavior in fundamental ways. But none of these games have any kind of badges. You just simply follow along and you play the game, but you don't really get anywhere in the game, so the game is not that interesting after a while, and you can't identify achievement. A few studies identified game theories in your design. So these weren't people that had any theoretical background in game building. They simply made something they thought would be engaging. The Exer games had a very high motivation, mostly in younger users. But the best games they found out there had 2 or 3 mechanics. You weren't just seeing how many push-ups you could do, but you might see how long you could hold your breath, or let's say how many sit-ups you could do. And the idea is that there might be different mechanics in sit-ups per week, or push-ups per day, or it might have to do with taking on more challenges that are presented to you as you achieve goals. The shortcomings in the literature, when you explore it, is that sample sizes were very small. A lot of the papers about Exergamification may only have 5 or 10 participants. They're generally descriptive studies and stats. They say, this is what we did in the game, this is what people liked and didn't like. There weren't validated scales to measure whether people were really engaged using psychological testing and psychometrics. They lacked control groups. Any studies in Exergamification that are out there just have users saying, I like the game, I would have liked this or more of this, but there was no control group simply doing exercise without the game to see who improved the most. They were in short time frames. These are games that are played over a few weeks. We would like Exergamification, I think you and I, to last for a year or two, so that you could really rely on the game to take you to a desired weight or fitness level. And there was no linkage to prior theory. All these seemed to be produced as though they were the first person to ever think an exercise game, and they launched it. Lots of shortcomings. There was no use of flow. That was the flow theory, where you do something that's difficult, difficult, and then you get a challenge to do something a little more difficult. That wasn't really used in these games. You'd think it'd be the basis of it, but it wasn't. And it had no reference to Richard Bartle's player types. And as we've talked about in previous broadcasts, so that you're, again, familiar, Richard Bartle worked out 4 different types of players that play multi-user dungeon games. And it tended to be a way we think of gamers. So we have explorers and competitors, and we have socializers and achievers. And so these kind of different types of people would want something in the game. So the games were geared only for one type of player, and there was no real flow introduced. So you can imagine these are relatively short-lived. They were too simplistic, and they're simply not sticky. What I mean by sticky is a game that you want to play month after month that really gets you to your goal. You're not going to get tired after a few weeks, and this is the problem with these simplistic games. Again, no achievements or badges. You simply shuffle the deck. Look at this game here. You have gym mats, 2 or 3 decks of cards, and a game poster. And you assign an exercise to each card. So this is where you do your sit-ups. This is where you maybe do a lion pose in yoga. This is maybe where you do push-ups. And then you have these different stars that will make you to do burpees and high knees. And then you have to kind of go from mat to mat. You know, that's great to do it for kids for an afternoon when you got nothing else to do. But that's not really going to motivate an adult that really has serious goals in mind. Kind of a lame things. I appreciate the effort, but look at this one. This is an Olympics workout game. So when you see Olympic rings, you have to do 30 seconds of burpees. When it cuts to a commercial, you start doing jumping jacks. When an athlete, so as things go on and you're watching TV, you're gaming it. This is good, but again, if long term, this is really not going to take you where you want to head to. So an interesting reflection on how we make it. So we're going to segue away from Exergames, which you can see, if you can build good Exergames now, I think you can probably make some money, because there's certainly nothing out in the market that's compelling on the thousands of apps in the App Store. We're going to segue into Worse by Harris Mark Ashley in 2018 called Beat the Street. And we're going to talk a little bit about gamification of depression and social isolation. So essentially what they did here, I want to sort of segue into this by talking about a fitness game that they used to reach youth. And then we're going to segue over to how we can take these same principles and treat other maladies of the body, such as, or of the mind, such as depression. They were able to, when they developed a game which had badging in some of these activities, they could take these youth and they increased their weekly walking by 180 minutes per week. I just set it back a little bit here, and increase the weekly physical activity by 300 minutes a week, vigorous activity by 48, and moderate activity by 60 minutes a week. This was 329 people. So this is getting youth to become more physically engaged by using some of these game elements, and that's how you can measure it. So they moved around a Mythical Town. So they had leaderboards that were developed by teams. So you invented this town using kind of a game world, and you could explore this town, and when you did, you had to walk around to get to different places in the town. So it was built, and again, when you built a game world, when you build a more complete structure, we had great participation and great outcomes. So Exergames can be done properly. And on a longer way to talk about psychological issues, Hiroyuki Weichi's study in 2018 is interesting to look at. This is a gamification-based intervention for health promoters. So what they did is they took 53 students, 30 in a test group, 23 in a control group, and they produced a mobile phone app called The Way of Health, and they had them play it for 100 days. And this time they used points, badges, and leaderboards to look at their progress, and everyone that played it said those were very useful. So this is the whole idea of primary care sports programs and preventive medicine. We can look at the work of Krista Murciamana next here in 2018. And what he did here is he used modified sports, which are easy to play. So he took 540 patients with different kinds of health ailments, had a mean age of about 58 years, and those under 40 adopted the games the most. So what you can do with modified sports is you can produce games on the computer or modified activities that people that have a disability can do to increase fitness by creating a game environment and by modifying it. Most adults between 55 and 64 really don't do much sports, don't play a lot of baseball and a lot of hockey. But adult men and women are equally likely to adopt modified games. And what was interesting is the body mass index didn't vary. The interest was independent. So even if you were overweight or you had a good physique, that really didn't seem to vary. Your interest in the game was independent. It seemed to relate to the fact that you'd modified the sporting activity, maybe half push-ups or running for 50 meters instead of running for an hour. These sort of things, that pulled in the older players. And now this segues across to something I think that's kind of interesting. We're in the middle of a soccer week, the World Cup right now, and there have been 51, as of last Thursday, there were 51 violations for audiences screaming, essentially, and forgive my language here, faggot, faggot, faggot. There's a word called punta that they use when they talk about a soccer player that's just screwed up. So the whole audience in Mexico at one point was all screaming punta, 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 which is essentially saying faggot, faggot, faggot. So there's a lot of homophobia that are contained in sports and fitness activities. And we can probably use gamification to make some changes in that sphere as well. There was a key landmark study called Out in the Field study. It was done in 2015 across 6 English-speaking countries. They looked at 9,500 participants, and of these participants, the majority were LGBT. And 81% of those surveyed witnessed or experienced homophobia in sports. The words that were used in sports most common are faggot and dyke. Isn't it incredible that in this day and age, this is still going on? I thought we were over this, but we're not. 88% of all gay youth are not open about sexuality with teammates. So there's a huge problem in homophobia in sports, and what are the solutions? So as we look deeper in Exergamification, can we find ways to make games more inclusive using game strategies? Indeed, we can. Now, when we look at this, there's what's called game-based cognitive behavioral therapy for sexual minority youth. And this is a publication by Iona Iosavides in 2017. And essentially, this is a modification of what's called Rainbow Sparks. We'll talk about Sparks in a moment. But Sparks stands for Smart, Positive, Active, and Realistic, and X-Factor Thoughts. And essentially, it was produced for youth, and it was freely available only in New Zealand. One study was done in the UK, and is the only game-based mental health intervention for sexual minority young people. So people that don't feel that they are included can start to use Rainbow Sparks to make sense of how they fit into the world of sport. And essentially, how does Sparks work? What Sparks does is best exemplified by the work of Dr. Sally Mary at the University of Auckland, which she's developed this e-therapy tool to cope with depression. So initially, Sparks was for young people treating depression. And so they produced an open game world again, and this game world gave us all these different avatars and characters. It was an app, and it was very engaging and exciting. And so it was really keyed for depression. It's a fantasy game format with their avatar, and they used DVD in the first iteration. There are various challenges that you have to do in the game, such as controlling your breathing, and they then started to measure it in clinical trials, and it was really a virtual world, and when you were able to reinvent yourself by interacting with the game. So it's a self-help depression tool. And what they did is they took huge problems and then broke them down into smaller ones. There were 7 levels of the game that were played at about 30 minutes each. The first thing they had to do was build a shield against depression. And it could give you an idea. And then eventually they get swords and they travel. We'll talk about it a bit more. But they had skill teaching 1 to 2 levels per week. And that's important when you're using game worlds and when you're using them to promote individual change. You want levels to occur during the week. You don't want it to be once every month you gain a new level. You want it to be so engaging that people are hooked on getting to the next level. At one point, they take a giant evil to the cave province to find hope in a chest. So they have a shield to guard them from depression, and now they discover hope. There's the bird of hope that offers an ancient art to restore the mind, and they learn how to breathe in slowly through the nose, air entering the stomach, and use mindfulness-based practice throughout this. They had to get rid of beasts in the game, again, by controlling the breathing, and that allowed you to release a power gem, and then an eagle flies you back to the mentor at that point. So you begin to develop cognitive tools for coping with depression, to focus on your breathing and to focus on various activities and to start to understand hope and the fact that depression is something external to you almost. It's like a monster, but you can hold the shield up and the monster can't get past the shield. This is the kind of thing we've done also in the management of addiction in adolescence in some of our pilot studies to get the idea that the people develop tools, game tools, to defend them against their own cognitive problems. So that's it for this week. I hope that you find this very helpful to look at the whole concept of Exergamification and how to take some of these principles to do some good in the world and help everybody feel included along the way. David Chandross, Center for Teaching and Learning here at Humber College. Have a great, hopeful week.